right, hi everybody. Hopefully everyone's been let in. If you are here, you can just say a quick hi in the chat. I'll start that out. There we go, we got some people. All right, so I'm Anna. I'm one of the LIN coaches, and today we're going to be going over a little bit of evidence building, meaning understanding how to recognize primary pain and the way it tends to act. So as a disclaimer, obviously most of us are not physicians, so we can't really officially diagnose ourselves or others, but we can kind of acknowledge the way that this pain tends to act and build ourselves a list of things that we connect to keep us feeling secure and understanding what we're looking at. So I will just kind of wait a few minutes to see if more people filter through. What we're going to do is just talk a little bit, and then we'll start building an evidence list ourselves. So if you want to open like a blank document or get out a piece of paper and a pen, you can go ahead and do that. And then at the end, we'll have maybe a few minutes for questions and answers. Hi, Jeff. Okay. Just give people a little more time. Just out of curiosity, of the people who are here, who's familiar with primary pain or like TMS or neuroplastic pain? Crickets. Okay. Yeah, someone is. Yeah, mind-body syndrome is another word for it. It's got a lot of different cloaks that it wears. Mind-body syndrome, PPD, TMS, primary, neuroplastic. Cool, okay. So for those who aren't familiar, I'll just do a quick definition of primary pain. And essentially what it is pain that's driven more by the pain signaling network. So when we have the brain receiving signals from the body, right, the brain sort of is the command center, and our nervous system sends all kinds of messages about where our body is in space and all of that. Sometimes the brain will take safe signals that don't necessarily need to cause pain, interpret them as dangerous, misinterpret rather, and then pain will be created in order to try and protect us. But this learned pain isn't necessary, and we don't need to, allow it to be chronic. So that's the kind of pain that we try to deal with here at LIN and help people reduce. And what an evidence list is basically all of the characteristics that we tend to see with this type of pain. And the reason we want to make an evidence list is because this pain is very linked to what we call the pain-fear cycle. And that means that because pain is a danger protective system in our body, when our body sort of is feeling fear or any emotional distress, really any message to the nervous system of we're not okay, then that can really feed into the chronic pain cycle with primary pain. So what an evidence list does, because we're generally used to, going from doctor to doctor to specialist to therapist, massage therapist, acupuncturist, and we're trying to figure out like what's broken about us, what's wrong. That can be really fearful. Sometimes we hear frightening things about our system or what's going on with us, and we're not sure what to do. And when we make these evidence lists, we're giving ourselves a little bit of safety, thinking, okay, here's all the evidence I have that actually I'm not broken. There's not something horribly wrong with me that I can't do anything about. And it can be really, an important departure from what we're accustomed to do and what we've really been encouraged and trained to do, which is look for what's wrong and look for how it's hopeless or there's nothing that we can do to help ourselves. So what I want to start with is just pulling out our list, so if you want to do it on paper, if you just got here, you can have like a piece of paper and a pen, or you can do it in your, notes in your phone or on a blank document, whatever you want to do. And we're actually going to go over all of the pieces of evidence that we tend to see among primary pain or primary symptoms. This can also apply to things like fatigue. And then when I say them, I just want you to either write down the ones that you connect to, or you can do like a tally system or whatever you want to do. There's no scoring, there's no test, right? So you can't do this wrong. It's just really for you to have this thing in your hands that tells you, okay, here's my evidence that maybe I'm safe, maybe I have some hope, right? So what I always tell my members, right, is that you're already really good at the other thing. You're already so good. You get a gold medal in figuring out what's wrong with you and working really hard. and, spending all of this time and all of your resources on trying to figure out what condition is broken, right? So all we're going to do is just gently take that skill that we have, take that very understandable need to essentially attach to what is wrong and what we can't do, and just set it aside for a moment. I think it's important for us to think of it that way instead of maybe I'm officially never going to think the way that I used to. I'm done looking for problems. Maybe you do feel that way, but I think for a lot of us it's quite challenging. So I just want you to set that aside just for like the next few minutes while we make this list. And I want you to really focus on, how can I connect? I think we all have a tendency to sort of hear things that we want to hear and then put up a wall, right? And be like, well, I do connect to that, but here's all the reasons why that doesn't count. So I just want you to say, hello, I see you, to that thought, and just gently let it go and allow yourself to write down the things that you feel you might have a connection to. So there are two main types of evidence that we're concerned with. And the first one is called circumstantial. And circumstantial evidence is more the indirect clues that we have based on our life circumstances, what we've been through, kind of our daily life, and our personality too, which is my favorite one. Because I don't know if you've heard of like the type T personality, or the sort of perfectionistic type that tends to go along with this type of pain. But I think a lot of us relate to that. So I'm just going to start listing off some of the things that we tend to see, and I just want you to mark off or write down quickly which ones you think you might relate to. And I'll try to speak slowly so that you can write down, but if I'm going too fast, just let me know. So the first one is what I would call like ACE, adverse childhood experiences, or traumas that we've experienced in the past. There is a link between pain, chronic pain particularly, and these experiences. And these can be defined so many different ways, but I'll give you just a few of the common ones that we see. So there's like an accident or an injury, maybe being in a car accident in the past, divorce, illness of a close family member, someone that's close to you, domestic violence, financial stress, bigotry, legal issues, immigration, a stressful job, moving can be a big one. Especially if you move a lot, so you have to start over, and being in a place where there's an active war. So all of these things are just examples. I mean, only you really know how something affects you, but those are things that either if they happened in the past or they're occurring in the present, or something that you're concerned about, can be a contributing factor. The next one for circumstantial is having many episodes of pain. So what we often see is that people will have either many occurrences coming and going of the same type of pain, say migraines, or they'll have many occurrences of different types of pain. So if you're someone who has had many instances of chronic pain being present in your life, either in one area or maybe in multiple, so it's quite common to have like both migraines and IBS, or both back pain and TMJ, or maybe even more things. Like I went through this myself, and I had a list of like 30 different symptoms that I had over the course of time. So I will list a few that are commonly seen, although of course it's more comprehensive if you want to get like the full list. But some of the most common ones are tension headaches or migraines, tinnitus, TMJ, facial pain, burning mouth syndrome, chronic cough, acid reflux, so heartburn. IBS is a big one, chronic pelvic pain or painful bladder, vulvodynia, sexual dysfunction, eczema or hives, like skin disorders, tendinitis, vertigo, chemical sensitivity, POTS, and chronic fatigue. So that's just a shorter list of some of the things that are common. And then another thing is that we often see people, and this is not everyone, but sometimes people will have like normal scans. So maybe you have pain, like back pain, let's say, and you go to get an MRI, and the MRI comes back with nothing on it. That can be really distressing and confusing for people because they're looking for an answer and a way out. And when the scan comes back normal, we're not really sure what to make of that. This is very common with primary pain, although there's also the concept of normal abnormalities, such as degenerative discs, that are often considered primary as well. And then the other one is treatment that either doesn't work at all, or it doesn't, it works well for a very short time and then suddenly stops working, and it's kind of medically unexplained. And the last one I'm going to bring up is about the experience going to see doctors and how we're often encountering very frightening messages around this condition or sensation that we have. So if you've been to a doctor and you've been, very looking for hope and kind of asking them to tell you what to do, and instead you're told something that is really frightening for you, like, this condition, only 50% of people with this condition ever feel any relief, or something like that, where it's really just an awful, fear-inducing experience with someone that you are trying to trust with your health. That's quite a common thing with chronic pain. We go through this cycle where we see so many people and we have our hopes raised and then sort of let down over and over again. And so in terms of the pain-fear cycle that tends to feed into itself, this is a very common thing as well. So just think gently about, what are my experiences seeing specialists or practitioners who deal with chronic pain? Or maybe even what experiences have I had going to Dr. Google, and what kinds of things have I encountered that really gave me that feeling that I wasn't going to be okay. Now, the last part is, as I said, my favorite part. I think it's kind of funny, but it's the personality traits that we tend to notice. And, if you don't relate to this, it's not like a sentence like, oh, you absolutely don't have primary pain. But people with primary pain tend to be a little bit more intense, is the word that we use. So it's like being like a very hardworking, perfectionistic person who's always pushing themselves really hard and wanting to do everything right. It's a really common thing. And what I'll say about perfectionism too is that it doesn't always present as an action, a behavior. It often, like with me, I would consider myself very perfectionistic, but wouldn't actually perform the action, would just build up the pressure of doing it perfectly so much internally that the action became impossible. And so perfectionism is more of sort of a mindset or way of operating than an actual behavior sometimes. The next one would be in line. It's having high expectations of yourself. So very high performing people who tend to kind of work themselves to death or burn out, very common. Being conscientious, so thinking constantly and almost to a detrimental degree about how others are doing, maybe even to the exclusion of your own well-being. Being hard on yourself, being overly responsible, frequent guilt, so if you're just going about your life and acting normally, but you have constant feelings of guilt about everything you do. Frequent worrying, so being really caught up in what's going to happen, what's going to go wrong, and trying to get hold of all of the things that could go wrong in your life. Wanting to be good, so this is like the goodism, and it's not just wanting to act good, but wanting to think of yourself as a good person, wanting others to think of you as a good person, and wanting to live up to that and being quite preoccupied with it. Being a rule follower, so that Hermione attitude of I must stick to the rules, and this is the way it is, and that's the way I'm going to act, and being a little bit rigid about that could be a bit common too. Having difficulty letting go, so if something happens and it's hard for it to sort of move through you emotionally, you get fixated on things. Having difficulty making decisions, tending to hold in thoughts and feelings. Now this one is certainly not true of everyone. I had primary pain and I tended to be someone who expressed their feelings quite a bit. But for some of us, it's almost like we don't have permission to express the feeling, and so we just kind of push it down, either to, out of guilt about the feeling, or in order to try and meet others' needs instead of our own. Frequently hostile or aggressive. Now, I know that sounds terrible, but I think it's more like if we're angered, we're easily fired up, right? That can be kind of indicative of what the nervous system is doing, right? Rage or resentment. Again, I want to bring some normalcy to this, because I think when we're engaging in so much concern for others, or so much concern about keeping our health and being okay, it can really lend itself to having a bit of resentment, because it's natural. But we tend to lean toward that of, working ourselves so hard, worrying, and then feeling resentful about how difficult that's been. Being cautious, shy, or reserved. Having low self-esteem. Feeling dependent on others. So in that sense, it's kind of both ends of the spectrum. It's like, is everyone dependent on me, or do I feel kind of powerless and dependent on others? Putting others' needs first, kind of brought that up earlier. Frequently feeling sad. Hypervigilant, and that's a big one too, is, if you tend to jump at small noises or just kind of are constantly on alert, what's wrong, that's a big, thing that feeds into the pain fear cycle as well. Prone to catastrophizing, guilty, and just generally fearful in life approach. So this is just a list of things that we tend to see as very common among personality traits with people with primary pain. And the second type of evidence is confirmatory evidence. Now, what that means is, I call it the gotcha evidence. So now that we kind of understand the way that primary pain tends to act, and we'll go into more depth with that, when we catch it in the moment acting that way, it can be really good evidence to kind of soothe ourselves and be like, oh, you know what? I didn't believe it at first, not fully, but then I caught it. Being present only when I was stressed out or disappearing when I was happy, something like that. So when we catch pain in the act of behaving like primary pain, we want to hold on to that as sort of a corrected experience. It's teaching us that we can have some trust in the fact that our pain is, subject to working on our nervous system. So here are a few things that we can sort of catch it in the act of doing. Pain that persists beyond normal healing times. So let's say that you had an injury that was 10 years ago and it's healed since then, and you felt fine for a long time, and then all of a sudden the pain pops up in the same place. Maybe you had a divorce or something, and all of a sudden this old injury starts flaring up, right? That's a piece of confirmatory evidence. Radiating or spreading. So pain that starts in one area and tends to spread or radiate all the way up a whole limb, something like that, gets larger over time. Pain moves around. So for example, people sometimes will have a headache that kind of hops to different areas of their head, like it'll be at the back and then it's kind of moving and shifting around the ears, or maybe going up into the sinuses, but it's not stationary. Mirroring, so symmetrical pain. Let's say that I have pain in both hands in the same way. So I'm typing and all of a sudden both my hands start flaring up. And then we have the inconsistency, which is a big one too. And that is when the pain is not stable. So it tends to change its behaviors a lot, either by time of day. So I only have pain at night and not in the morning, or vice versa. Symptoms occur after, but not during activity or exercise, so the delayed onset pain. Let's see. Symptoms occur strongest during the night or first thing in the morning, as I mentioned. Symptoms go down when I'm doing a joyful or distracting activity, So when we notice that our pain is much less when we're focused on something else, that can be a bit of evidence too. Especially when, this is a very common thing with my members. They'll tell me, I felt the same all the time, and then all of a sudden I go to California for a week and my pain is much less. That can be a really great example of how our emotional state can impact our pain and how we can sort of utilize that to feel better. And then comforting interventions, improving pain. So something like, Reiki or something like that, where it's comforting to you emotionally, and therefore you notice that the pain is responding in its intensity. And then triggers. So triggers is sometimes harder for people to understand, but it's the way that the brain uses association. So if you've ever heard the phrase, neurons that fire together, wire together. That means that when two things happen at the same time, the brain sometimes learns to link them. And so sometimes we can learn a trigger I'm trying to think of a good example. Like light or sound or smell. Let's say that you got food poisoning from blueberries, right? And then one day you just smell blueberries and they're perfectly safe, but you get nausea, right? This is an association that your brain has made an effort to protect you from harm. It's now saying, okay, blueberries, even without eating them, I'm going to give you a symptom in response to this stimulus because of association, to try and make sure that you don't make the same mistake twice. And we'll often do this with pain. Let's say we have, back pain or knee pain, and there's a certain type of chair that we once got pain in. the brain is trying to protect you from having pain again. And so sometimes it will link certain stimuli, like a chair, like a food, like a smell, and sort of wire those things together so that when one happens, it tells itself to do the other. All right, so the last thing I want to bring up is something called predictive coding, and this is very related to triggers too. When we are associating something, right, the brain is trying to protect us prior to something actually happening, and so it will instigate pain in response to something that hasn't actually hurt us yet. And not just pain, I mean primary symptoms. So for example, if I were to go out into my yard and I see my hose all curled up and it's just sort of out of my periphery, if my brain doesn't want to use up all its energy, like going and taking a deep look at what that is, it might look like a snake. And so without actually going further into it and figuring it out, my brain will just instigate like a response where I jump back or I feel frightened. Maybe my heart starts pounding. And I have to actually pause and look at it and analyze it and use more energy in order to realize it's a non-threatening stimulus. But my brain has predicted, without actually, digging into what the stimulus is, that this is something dangerous and responded accordingly. So sometimes when we have a trigger, say like a chair or a smell, the brain will just issue the sensation prior to actually being affected by a threat in order to prevent us from actually engaging with the threat. All right, so I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to keep writing. I will wait for that, and then we'll go into a little bit of Q&A. So if you have any burning questions that you want to throw in the chat, please feel free to do that. Oh, another trigger that I like to bring up is thinking about something. So like if I have knee pain, and I generally get it when I run, if I were to just close my eyes and really focus on thinking about the activity of running and my knee pain flares up, it's kind of, this beautiful evidence of like, it's just my brain, predictive coding. It's my brain trying to protect me because it's understanding the association, but I haven't even done the activity yet. Actually, my colleague Shannon just did a really great webinar for migraines on imaginal exposure, which is where you utilize that imagination to actually habituate yourself to something that used to trigger you in order to try to turn the response down. All right, so if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Just put them in the chat and we'll go from there. What do you recommend when we recognize a predictive coding happening? So essentially what we're doing is safety reappraisal, because how we've associated these two things, right? And so now we are disassociating? No, we're decoupling them, right? We're now trying to break apart these associations that have gotten stronger over time. And so while our brain is accustomed to, let's say, smelling blueberries, feeling threatened, and sending out pain, or nausea, or whatever it is, we're now going to allow the sensation because it's what it's used to doing, right? But we're going to actively reappraise it within ourselves, and we're going to say, okay, I recognize that this is an association happening. I recognize the phenomenon, or, oh, can everybody hear me? Someone had issues with audio. We recognize that the phenomenon of predictive coding may be happening, and we just say, okay, I recognize this. However, I, the adult, and not my sort of childish and protective part of my nervous system, recognize that this is safe. And over time, as we do this, like with any habit, with any learning, we learn to associate safety with it instead of danger, therefore breaking the cycle of pain and fear. All right. So many attributes I resonate with. Rather than freeing me to accept primary pain, I feel overwhelmed. Yeah. I mean, I think it could be a lot of things. It's really natural with this method. Like we're so overstimulated. We're so overstressed in a way that's not fair to us because of the toll that primary pain takes on us, and just pain in general. I think it's okay to just accept the feeling of, I don't want to say resistance or rejection. Sometimes that's the case. Otherwise, just feeling like, back off. Like, don't try to give me hope for another thing when I've already been through so much. And we can engage a little bit, right? We want to do the appropriate challenge. So if we're trying to convince ourselves that we're safer, maybe we don't jump right into, this is primary, there's nothing wrong with me. Maybe we just do the recognition of, okay, I am terrified. I'm frightened. I'm having a hard time believing, and just accept that at first. And then slowly trickling in, maybe there's one piece of evidence that you connect to that you're able to feel a little bit more safe around. Like we can recognize predictive coding, but we don't necessarily think that there's anything we can do about it. We can accept that at first. And then little by little, we're able to open ourselves up more naturally, just like a relationship. We've got to go tiny step by step, building that trust with the new way of thinking. All right, let's see. My pain's always in the same place, and exercise makes it worse, but I've been told I could see 100 people and no one would find anything wrong. Could being the world's best goodist alone explain primary pain? Yeah, I mean, me not being a physician, I couldn't diagnose you. I would say that, I've had a similar experience where I've had pain that just absolutely couldn't be explained, and the only thing that I could really point to was my stress, my emotions, and what was going on in my life, feeling a constant feeling of threat. So I would have pain that would start in one arm, and then it would jump to the hand, and it would jump to my ribs, and then it would jump to my abdomen, and it would just be crazy. I called it pinball symptoms, right? And I really didn't have any explanation, and no doctor could tell me anything that was helpful. So I think that's a common enough story that it's on the list, right? It's one of these things that we see all the time. And I had back pain that was chronic as well, and it was very stationary. So not all of these things are going to be true. It's now gone, and it's resolved because of my relationship with fear changing. But it was just in one spot, and it was actually a spot where I had some kind of vertebral narrowing that was sort of blamed for it, but it's gone. So how do you explain that? I don't know. All right, let's see. Next question. Triggers can be so overwhelming. Is it necessary to experience those triggers to teach the brain safety? This is a really good question. And in all honesty, one of the most effective things that we can do is engage in graded exposure. It's not the only thing, but when we do things like reintroducing activities that we had previously coded as harmful, that's the only way to reassociate. Now, we can reassociate with things like imaginal exposure where we're not actually doing it. However, if we're avoiding it, we're continuing to feed into the belief in the nervous system that it's dangerous. And even with things like somatic tracking, where we do an mind-body mindfulness exercise, reappraising a sensation as safe, there is some exposure to the pain. We've got to be able to look at the pain and not be fearfully avoidant of it. How did your healing journey go? Can you speak to your relationship to fear changing a little more? Yeah, I mean, it's been a very long one. I was just someone who was an incredibly anxious and fearful child and just had symptoms all over the place since I was 5 years old. And at this point, with the back pain, it's kind of funny because I was not sure what was causing it, and I was very afraid of it being like a tumor or something. And so I already believed in mind-body work and primary pain, but didn't know whether some of the conditions associated with primary pain were applicable to me. So when I finally got a scan and was diagnosed with degenerative discs, which is the hardest thing in the world to say, I just started to laugh because I already thought that was primary, and it disappeared that day. It was absolutely insane. With other things, it's been a very slow process, but I will say that the sort of, tried and true method for me is just to recognize my panic and desire to run away from a sensation and just sitting with it as though it's not threatening. Because I think that even though our thoughts can be very impactful, we've got to act our way. We've got to drop into our body and somatically feel our way into changing our sensation, changing it to a sense of safety. And so, for example, I would have a feeling of panic or a feeling of pain in my hand or something, and I would just stop, pause, recognize the racing thoughts, and just look at it and feel in whatever way was most authentic to me, this is safe. This is a safe sensation. If I'm, drawing and it's hurting, I'm not necessarily gonna, I have to stop drawing right now. Maybe I'll give myself a little break, or maybe I'll just keep going gently and just say, I know, I get that you're stressed, but it's safe, it's okay. And it works. It really does over time. Yeah, I know some of you are having some tech issues. I'm sorry about that. But this will be recorded, so you'll all be sent a recording of this later too. So no worries there. Are there any other questions? All right. So, by the way, guys, if you want to talk to either me or one of my colleagues about your own personal situation, because I know it can be kind of tough to try and figure it out on your own, we do a free intake with the Lynn team. So yeah, that'll be either me or a couple other people who are coaches and really understand this type of pain. So I'm going to put the link in there. Please feel free to use it. We love talking to you, and we all are very passionate about primary pain recovery. So I will include that here. There we go. And then how to tackle the personality trait issues. Yeah. That's kind of a big question too. I think that it depends on what it is. Like there are certain things like goodism that, like nothing is all bad, right? It's a wonderful quality, and it's also problematic when it gets to be over the line of like, this is controlling my life, right? Once we stop seeing a benefit and start just piling on guilt and shame about our reactions to things, it's like you're vitamin B deficient, and so you take so much vitamin B that you're not even absorbing it anymore, and it starts being counterproductive and maybe even not healthy for you. And so that's what we're trying to do, is recognize the boundary of when, oh yeah, her name was Shannon Doherty, and in fact, I'll try and find the link, but yeah, we want to look at personality traits like they're just a useful tool. It's like something that we have, some skill that we have that also needs to be kept in balance. And when we find it being out of balance, we need to do sort of the mind-body method of, okay, recognition. Can I have some self-compassion if I had not had it before? If the room's cold, we turn on the heat. We don't turn on the air conditioning. So, we're experiencing issues because of guilt. We don't put guilt on top of guilt on top of guilt about being a goodist or a perfectionist or even being resentful, right? We've got to be human. We've got to feel the resentment. We've got to, be able to disconnect behavior from sensation, drop into the body and feel, but not necessarily, snap at somebody who doesn't deserve it, right? And then if we do, again, human. So I think that's kind of my method for that, is we treat our personality traits the same way we treat pain sensations, which is to say there's a level of acceptance, there's a level of recognition and sort of being able to appraise it as what it is versus like a big scary monster. It's just, oh, I've got a little goodism coming up right now. And then allowing ourselves to sit with it and then let it go. There's something about emotions, I think I forgot which study it was, but an emotional cycle is meant to be 90 seconds long. And the reason that it lasts longer is because of rumination. We're sort of feeding into them, not in a blameful way, but just we're trying to solve things when in fact sometimes we just need to be allowed to feel them, and it's a little counterintuitive. All right. So as we leave, I'm going to just have you do a quick breathing exercise with me. If you have breathing issues, just please feel free to excuse yourself from it. But we're going to do a couple of 4-7-8 breaths. So if you've heard of that, it is just 4-second inhale, 7-second hold, 8-second exhale. It's just to help us get into that rest and digest mode. All right? So I'll count and you just breathe along with me, okay? Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if you have your evidence list, I want you to just bookmark it or keep it somewhere where it's, you know where it is, right? You don't have to put it in your face all the time unless you want it like on your mirror or whatever. But I want you to have that, and just remember the feeling of setting aside the need to discount it. You know, that's always available to you, always. And yet there's something that can sort of counteract and give you the gold medal in the other direction, right? You've got the gold medal of looking for what's not okay. Let's just try and allow ourselves to earn the medal in the opposite direction and just see what happens. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope that you take advantage of the intake because we love to talk with you. So I'll put that in the chat one more time. Bye, everyone.